When the Earth changed from being flat to round, a new continent was discovered, making the USA the most devised human population in the world. The largest American Indian tribe is the Cherokee with 284,000 full-blooded individuals. In the late 1600s, Welsh Quakers began coming to America in droves, settling in Pennsylvania and later in Ohio. The Portuguese have a long history in the U.S., fighting in the American Revolution in the 16th and 17th centuries. Another large wave of Portuguese immigrants also came to the U.S. in the mid to late 20th century. New York City, originally New Amsterdam, was established by Dutch immigrants in the early 17th century. More Dutchmen came to America following World War II. Although Greek heritage has been recorded in the U.S. since the 1600s, the most substantial number arrived in the mid-1800s. In 1619, black or African American descendants arrived from the west and central parts of Africa. Danes have been living here since the late 1600s, but they steadily immigrated in the 1800s, settling in California, Utah, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. In the 1680s 1 million Scottish immigrants left for the U.S. Many were in search of work in the shipping industry when their economic conditions worsened. Around the 1800s, Arab Americans from Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Palestine, and Syria, among other countries arrived. Polish Americans are the largest of the Slavic groups in the U.S. and represent some of the earliest colonists in the New World. Between the 1800s and 1918, 2.5 million entered. Chinese first began arriving on the West Coast in the early 1820s. When the gold rush began, the population grew exponentially and most still live in California. The Irish Great Famine of the 1840s sparked a mass exodus from Ireland. It's estimated that 4.5 million Irish moved to the U.S. and settled in large cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, and San Francisco. French Canadian Americans make up a large and diverse group. Many immigrated from Quebec between 1840 and the late 1920s. The largest wave of Germans came to America during 1845, facing civil unrest and high unemployment. Today, they can be found in most non-coastal states. Hungarians are one of the oldest ethnic groups. After their revolution in 1848, they left for a better life. Around 1848, Czechs were known as Bohemian, since they originally came from the lands of the Bohemian crown. In France, political refugees fled from the failed 1848 revolution. In 1851, over 20,000 French immigrants arrived in New York and created the newspaper called Les Républicains. Swedish emigration was motivated by economic advancement. From 1851 to 1930, more than 1.2 million Swedes crossed the Atlantic. After the U.S. purchased Alaska in 1867, many Russians and Alaska natives remained in the territory. Others moved to Maryland, New York, or North and South Dakota. From 1886 to 1869, people from Japan began immigrating to the U.S. in significant numbers following the political, cultural, and social changes stemming from the Meiji Restoration. Between 1880 and 1920, more than 4 million Italians arrived in the United States. They formed Little Italies in many large northeastern areas. Their Italian food, entertainment, and music influenced American life and culture. Norwegians are from North Ireland, between 1880 and 1893, and settled in the upper Midwest, especially Minnesota, western Wisconsin, northern Iowa, and the Dakotas. The Mexican Revolution took place from 1910 to 1920 and most moved because of political persecution. Most of them settled along the southwestern U.S. border. Cubans began arriving in the early 1900s, with larger numbers flowing in, after the Cuban Revolution of 1959. Almost 70% still live in Florida. Puerto Ricans migrated here in large numbers after 1917 when we passed the Jones-Shafrath Act that granted all Puerto Ricans U.S. citizenship. West Indian immigrants arrived in the 1950s and 1960s. This group includes Bahamian, Bermudan, Haitian, Jamaican, Trinidadian, or U.S. Virgin Islanders. Just before 1960, the U.S. was home to fewer than 10,000 Salvadorans. Their civil war in the 1980s forced thousands to flee from El Salvador. 1965 welcomed more than 40,000 Filipinos to California, Hawaii, New York, Illinois, and Texas. After the Vietnam War in 1975, many Vietnamese immigrants arrived to escape extreme poverty or persecution. All of these facts make the U.S. ancestry history the most devised human population in the world.